The saloon doors didn't creak. They flew inward as Mika's boots slammed through them. Shouts died mid-breath. Cards froze in the air. Reed, Flint, and Gus jerked up from their table, whiskey sloshing over their filthy knuckles as the scent of cheap liquor and smoke curled around them. Mika strode in like a storm given human shape, dust spiraling at her heels. She jabbed a finger toward the three men, her voice cutting through the dim room like a knife. "You burned my village. Say it." Their smirks widened, thrilled by her fury. Flint raised his bottle in a mocking toast. No proof, Apache girl, just smoke and stories. He hurled the bottle at her face, but someone moved first. A chair scraped violently as Jude Gunner rose from the shadows, stepping into the bottle's path. Glass shattered across his cheek, blood streaking down to his jaw. Without hesitation, he drew a silver-plated revolver, its polished barrel catching the lantern light. The room snapped taut. Then the barkeep thundered, "Behave yourself, cowboy." Dust hung thick in the late afternoon light as Jude Gunner lowered his silver revolver, jaw tight, cheek bleeding. The saloon's tension throbbed like a plucked wire. Mika stood beside him still, coiled, unblinking, her breath steady despite the bottle that had nearly struck her. Reed, Flint, and Gus shrank back only an inch, but fear flickered behind their drunken bravado. Jude knew that look well. Men who swaggered until the gunmetal glare of a revolver stripped them down to cowards. The barkeep's order echoed through the room. But Jude didn't holster his weapon. Not yet. He kept it angled low, ready, while Mika's gaze swept the saloon sharp. Assessing. She wasn't frightened, if anything. Her stillness carried the promise of violence held in check. Under the lantern glow, her brown skin held the sheen of sun and grit, and the feather tied to her braid trembled with the hum of her breath. Outside, the wind rattled loose shingles along the saloon's porch, carrying with it the red dust of Tularosa Basin. New Mexico territory was a land of endless sunburned plains and bone-dry riverbeds, where the horizon blurred into heat, shimmer, and justice bent under the weight of whoever owned the most land. Austin Silver owned more than more cattle, more acres, more men willing to get their hands dirty for the price of a drink. And these three, Reed, Flint, and Gus, were exactly that kind of men. Mika had followed their tracks from the smoking ruins of her Apache village, tracing the hoof prints through sagebrush flats and empty dry washes until they led her directly to this saloon. For Jude, her appearance now made sense why her eyes carried a fury too controlled to be aimless, why her boots were caked in ash instead of sand. Something horrible had happened to her people, and these men had been happy to brag about it. Reed spat on the floor, trying to reclaim his swagger. "Girl's crazy, Jude. Don't get yourself in trouble over an Apache nobody." Jude's voice stayed quiet. "Dangerous." "Shut your mouth, Reed." A murmur rippled through the room. Jude Gunner had a reputation steady with a rifle, quick to solve trouble when lawmen failed, and too stubborn to bend to Silver or his bribed sheriff. He didn't throw punches without reason, and he didn't shield people without meaning it. The barkeep slammed a mug onto the counter. "All of you outside. Now, I won't have blood in my saloon." Jude finally holstered his revolver, the silver catching the lantern light one last time. He nodded toward the doors. "Come on," he said to Mika, though he wasn't sure why he felt responsible for her safety. Maybe it was the way she didn't ask for help, didn't even look at him yet, felt carved from the same hard land he'd spent his life fighting. Mika walked past him without a word, chin lifted, moving like someone who trusted no one but her own breath. Jude followed her out into the blowing red dusk of Tularosa Basin, unaware that the moment he stepped onto the porch beside her, his life and his land had already begun to change. The wind outside the saloon slapped them both with a blast of red dust. Mika didn't flinch. Jude did, only because the blood from the broken bottle stung as it slid toward his jawline. She glanced at the wound, her expression unchanged, but her steps slowed just enough to show she'd noticed. "You're bleeding," she said, flat and simple. "I've had worse," Jude answered, pressing his thumb briefly to the cut. The skin throbbed beneath it, but he didn't want to look like he cared, not in front of the woman who had marched into a saloon full of enemies without so much as a blink. They stood in the dirt street, shadows stretching long beneath the sinking sun. Through the saloon walls came muffled curses, Reed trying to relearn his pride, Flint grumbling about Jude's interference, Gus laughing the nervous laugh of a man inches from trouble. "You shouldn't have stepped in," Mika said. "You shouldn't have walked into a saloon full of cowards." Jude shot back, her eyes narrowed, not offended, but weighing him. She had the gaze of a tracker, someone who read truth the way others read footprints. Finally she said, "I did not come for a fight. I came for answers." Jude tilted his head. Answers about what she inhaled. Just once, as if choosing how much of herself to reveal. "My village. It burned. My people fled. Those men..." Her jaw tightened. They bragged about the fire like it was a game. Jude felt something taint settle in his chest. He'd known for years that Austin Silver wanted the Apache land near the basin. He'd known Silver used hired hands for dirty work. But hearing it from someone who'd walked through ashes, that was different. "I'm sorry," Jude said quietly. "Truly." Mika didn't thank him. She didn't soften, but her shoulders lowered by a breath, just enough to show the words had reached her. He studied her again, the soot on her leggings, the smudged patterns of her moccasins, the faint scent of pine sap clinging to her buckskin vest. She had come straight from the ruins, straight from loss, and she still stood like a warrior. Jude wasn't sure what made him say the next part. Maybe the blood trickling warm down his cheek. Maybe the way she stared toward the desert, as if planning to track the men again alone. "Listen," he said, voice low. "Silver's men won't stop. Not after today. You don't have to face them by yourself. I have faced worse alone." Mika replied. "I don't doubt it," Jude said, stepping into her line of sight. "But you don't have to tonight." She hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation. Her people had learned long ago that trusting the wrong man could cost lives. At last, she nodded once. "You are wounded. I will treat it." Jude blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. "I'll be fine," he muttered. "You are not," she said simply. "And I owe a debt." Before he could argue, Mika turned and began walking down the road, following the path that led toward Jude's ranch. She expected him to keep up. He did, and for reasons he couldn't yet name. Jude Gunner felt something settle, something like the first step toward a battle he hadn't known he was already fighting. The ride to Jude Gunner's ranch was long enough for the desert wind to soften, but not long enough for Mika to forget the blood trickling down his cheek. She kept glancing at the wound, not with worry, but with calculation. A cut that deep needed tending. A man who stepped into the path of a bottle for someone he didn't know needed even more consideration. When they reached the ranch, dusk had settled into the bones of Tularosa Basin. The air cooled, brushing over the patchy fences and the weary barn that sagged under years of wind. Jude swung down from his horse with a controlled exhale. Mika approached him silently. Inside, she said. Not a request. A decision. Jonas McCready watched from the barn door, squinting at the sight of an Apache woman walking a bleeding cowboy into the house. Jude didn't explain. He didn't need to. Inside, the cabin was small, one room, a stove that groaned when coaxed to life, shelves filled with tools instead of trinkets. Mika lit a lamp, its flame flickering against rough timber walls. Jude sat because she pointed to the chair. She moved because she knew exactly what to do. She heated water in a dented tin pot, emptied Jude's drinking canteen, and reached for a cloth without hesitation. Her presence took up no space, and all the space at once quiet, efficient, commanding. When she stepped close, Jude felt the air shift. Her hands were steady as she cupped his jaw, tilting his face toward the light. Her fingers were warm, her touch firm enough to anchor him. "This will sting," she said. "Already does," Jude murmured. Mika didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition, maybe. The iron of someone who had lived through fire meeting the steel of someone who had survived loss. She dipped the cloth in warm water and pressed it gently to his cheek. Jude hissed between his teeth. Mika did not apologize. She cleaned the wound with slow, precise movements, as though each stroke erased something more than blood, as though she were learning the shape of the man who had stood between her and danger without hesitation. "You should not have done that," she said. "What get hit for you?" Jude answered. "Step in the way." "Didn't have time to think," he said. "That is the problem," Mika replied quietly. She leaned in closer to examine the cut. Jude could feel her breath-dry warmth touched with the faint scent of pine resin and smoke. Her braid slid forward, brushing his shoulder, and he held still, not because of the pain, but because moving would break the moment. "You track," Jude said. "You fight. You act without fear. But you worry about me doing the same." Mika dipped the cloth again, wrung it out. "I do not fear acting. I fear acting foolishly." "And you think I did?" She looked at him, then really looked. Her dark eyes softened, the fire inside them dimming just enough to reveal something deeper beneath. "You bleed now when you did not have to." Jude laughed under his breath. "You're the reason I bled. That counts for something." Mika paused. The cloth stopped mid-air. Her expression didn't change, but something tightened in her throat, a small flinch she did not let surface. Then she resumed cleaning the wound. When she finished, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a small container of salve, her own herbal mixture. Dark and fragrant. She spread it gently over the cut with her fingertips. Jude's breath hitched, not from the sting, but from the sudden realization that no one had touched him with this kind of care in years. "You know your way around wounds," he said softly. "I know pain," she replied. "My people survive by learning to mend it." Jude held her gaze. "Did anyone mend yours?" A long silence stretched between them. Mika's fingers slowed. The salve glistened on his cheek like a dark comet trailing warmth. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." Those two words settled into Jude's chest with a weight he hadn't expected. He understood them more than she knew. When she finished, Mika stepped back. The distance between them felt noticeable, as if the room had grown colder without her nearness. "You will scar," she said again. "Maybe I'll keep it," Jude replied. "To remember why it happened. To remember foolishness." To remember you. That stunned her. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She simply inhaled a small, sharp breath that betrayed how deeply the words struck. Mika turned away before she let anything more slip. She cleaned her hands, set aside the cloth, and reached for her pouch. "I will not stay inside," she said. "I will sleep where I can hear danger coming." "You don't have to," Jude said. "I do. Trust takes time, and I do not know your people." Jude nodded. "Then, sleep where you want. But know this, no danger will reach you here without going through me first." She paused at the door. The lamplight framed her silhouette, fierce and solitary. "You have fire in you, Jude Gunner," she said softly. "But fire burns those who hold it too tightly." Then she stepped outside, leaving Jude alone with the warm ache of her touch and the cold ache of wanting to pull her back. He pressed a hand to his cheek, feeling where her fingers had lingered. For the first time in a long while, the wound did not hurt as much as the absence of her beside him. Night settled over Tularosa Basin like a sheet of dark velvet, still and deceptively calm. Jude had just finished securing the corral gate when he noticed Mika standing motionless near the well. Her silhouette was rigid, her head tilted like a wolf catching a scent. "What is it?" he asked. Mika raised one hand, demanding silence. Her eyes narrowed toward the barn, toward the shadows flickering unnaturally along its side. Then she saw it. The faint glint of metal, the sloshing sound of liquid. A spark. Her voice tore through the night. "Fire. They're here." Jude didn't hesitate. He didn't ask who, he didn't ask why. His silver revolver was in his hand faster than breath, the polished metal gleaming under the moon. 3 figures jerked in surprise: Reed, Flint, and Gus. Reed froze with a lantern lifted high, its flame trembling above a trail of a billed oil. Flint cursed and dropped his match. Gus spun around, realizing they'd been caught by the very woman they'd hoped would die in the flames. Jude fired. The shot cracked across the basin, loud and sharp. Gus screamed as the bullet tore into his leg, collapsing him instantly. The lantern in Reed's hand wobbled wildly, and he dropped it, barely avoiding an explosion. Flint grabbed him by the collar. "Run, run!" The two fled into the darkness, kicking up clouds of dust as they tripped over fences and rocks in their panic. Gus tried to crawl away, but his leg gave out, leaving a smear of blood across the dirt. Mika was already sprinting for the barn, her hair whipping behind her, water. Now Jude didn't argue. He and Jonas McCready hauled the heavy barrel from beside the porch, tipping it toward the barn wall as flames licked up the dry wood. Mika tore open the side door, coughing through the first wave of smoke, and shouted at the terrified horses inside. "Out, go!" They bolted past her, hooves pounding the dirt. Embers rained down as Jonas struggled with the roofline. Jude grabbed a shovel, beating back the fire, devouring the exterior planks. "More water," Mika called out again. Jonas staggered back with another bucket. Jude dumped it over the hottest patch, steam exploding into the air. Mika dashed around the other side, dragging a tarp to smother a crawling flame before it swallowed the haystack. The fire hissed, spit, raged, but the 3 of them pushed harder. Bucket after bucket, strike after strike. Smoke stung their eyes, clung to their clothes, and twisted into their lungs. But slowly, agonizingly, the flames shrank, then flickered, then died. leaving a blackened, steaming wound along the barn wall. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Jonas coughed, bending with his hands on his knees. Devils, all three of them. Jude wiped soot from his forehead, breathing hard. His gaze drifted across the yard, where the dark trail of Gus's blood wound its way into the brush. He's bleeding out, Jude said. Mika, lantern. She brought it without question. The two stood side by side, illuminated by the warm orange glow, sweat and ash streaking their skin. They followed the blood trail into the thicket beyond the corral. Jude's hand hovered near his revolver, finger ready. Mika walked slightly ahead of him, lighter on her feet, tracking the wounded man like a predator tracking prey. The trail wasn't hard. Gus had dragged himself only a short distance before collapsing under the branches of a mesquite tree. He panted, chest heaving, face pale beneath the dirt. Don't shoot," he whimpered when he saw them. Jude's revolver stayed leveled. "You tried to burn my ranch down." Gus swallowed. Silver made us save it," Mika said coldly. She stepped beside Jude, her shadow falling across the cowering man. "You will speak when the sheriff hears you." Not before. Gus's eyes darted frantically between them, searching for mercy. He found none. Jude nodded toward the ranch. "Jonas can help haul him. We take him in at first light." Mika tilted her chin toward the wounded man. "Tie his hands. He is desperate. Desperate men bite." Jude almost smiled, even exhausted, covered in ash. She still saw danger before it moved. He knelt and bound Gus's wrists with rope. Gus whimpered again, but Jude didn't loosen the knot. When he stood, he met Mika's eyes in the lantern glow, dark, steady, blazing with the heat of someone who refused to lose another home to fire. "You saved this place," Jude said quietly. Mika didn't answer for several breaths. Her chest rose and fell. Soot smeared across her brow. Finally she said, "And you saved me. Tonight makes us even." But Jude knew better. Tonight had shifted something deeper than a ledger of debts. As they walked back toward the ranch, the ground still steaming, the barn charred, and the horses restless, Jude glanced at Mika's profile against the fire-lit horizon. She looked fierce, unbroken, carved from survival. And yet, walking beside her, for the first time since he inherited this battered land, Jude Gunner felt something startling, a sense that he wasn't standing alone against the darkness. And for Mika, who had walked through the ashes of her village, something equally dangerous stirred the fragile, unfamiliar warmth of trusting someone long enough to fight beside them. Dawn bled slowly over Tularosa Basin, pale and trembling, as if the sky itself hesitated to touch the charred remains of the night. Smoke hung low over Jude Gunner's ranch, drifting lazily above the blackened barn wall. Mika stood beside Jude in the cold morning light while he secured Gus to the saddle, tightening the rope until the wounded man winced. "Please," Gus begged through chattering teeth, "don't let me die. I'll talk. Sheriff'll listen. I'll tell him everything. I swear it." Mika stepped closer, her voice low and without sympathy. "You did not fear death when you tried to burn our home." Jude paused. A strange ache pulled through him at her phrasing. "Our home." She'd said it instinctively, without thinking, without guarding herself. He didn't comment, afraid the moment would vanish if he acknowledged it. They mounted their horses in silence, Jude riding slightly ahead, Mika riding beside him. Gus slumped behind them. The rising sun cast long shadows across the basin as they approached the town. Jude kept glancing sideways at Mika. Her posture was rigid, but her eyes carried the simmering heat of a storm she refused to let break. He recognized it. Pain held too long, anger with nowhere left to go. Sheriff Henry Doyle stood on the porch of the jailhouse when he saw them coming. His expression tightened when he noticed Gus, tied and bleeding. "What happened?" he asked, though the dread in his voice suggested he already knew more than he wanted to admit. "Arson," Jude said flatly. "Attempted murder, and he's ready to confess." Doyle lifted his hands, palms outward. "Now hold on. Let's not make accusations." Before Mika dismounted in one swift, fluid motion and crossed the space between them. When she stopped in front of the sheriff, he suddenly seemed much smaller. "3 men came to burn his ranch," she said. "One is here. The others ran. They bragged of burning my village before they burned his." Doyle swallowed hard. "Those are serious claims." Claims. Mika's voice sharpened, not in volume but in edge. "I walk through the ashes of my people. I know the smell of a fire set by a man's hand." "You will take his confession." She pointed at Gus with her chin, never looking away from Doyle. "Or you will explain to both of us why law does not live in this town." She wasn't a woman asking for justice. She was justice demanding to be answered. Doyle stepped aside, unable to hold her gaze any longer. Jude hauled Gus down from the saddle, and together they dragged him inside the jailhouse. Gus's blood smeared across the wooden floor as he collapsed into a chair. Pain unstrung his pride. Fear tore down whatever loyalty he had left. "It was Silver," he cried almost immediately. "Silver made us do it. Said burn the Apache camp. Said nobody'd miss him. Said burn Gunner's place next. And blame it on the girl. Just don't let them stand in the way of his land." The room went dead silent. Doyle leaned forward, his voice shaking. "Austin, Silver ordered both fires." "Yes," Gus sobbed. "Said the basin was his. Said we'd get paid extra if no one walked away." Mika's hands curled into fists at her sides. Jude's jaw tightened until the muscles trembled. Everything they suspected, everything Mika feared was laid bare. Doyle rubbed a trembling hand across his face. For years he had looked the other way, too afraid to confront the man who controlled half the basin. But now the truth sat bleeding on his floor, and the weight of Mika's stare reminded him he could no longer hide behind excuses. "Fine," he whispered. "We'll go to him. Now." Word traveled quickly. By the time they reached Austin Silver's sprawling house, curious townsfolk had begun trailing behind them, drawn not by courage, but by the magnetic pull of a reckoning long overdue. Silver stepped onto his porch with the arrogance of a man who believed the land and the people belonged to him. "Sheriff Doyle," he said calmly, tapping his silver-tipped cane. "What brings you to my door at sunrise?" Gus, dragged forward by Jude, lifted a shaking hand. "You told us to burn them, both fires. You said Silver struck the porch with his cane to lies drunken nonsense. Then Mika stepped ahead of everyone. You burned my home," she said, "and you tried to burn his. But fire speaks truth when men lie. Gus speaks because he knows you cannot hide beneath the ashes anymore." Her voice carried through the crowd, steady and unbreakable. Silver's confidence faltered. His face, handsome and polished, cracked under the weight of her accusation. Doyle exhaled shakily and raised the cuffs. Austin Silver, you are under arrest for arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder, you fool, Silver spat. You're ruining yourself for an Apache woman and a half-broke cowboy. Jude stepped closer, not in threat, but in certainty. No, Silver, you ruined yourself. The cuffs snapped shut. The crowd murmured. Silver's empire fractured like the bottle Flint had thrown just days before. When it was done, when Silver was locked behind bars, and the cheers of relief began to ripple through the town, Jude and Mika rode back toward the ranch. The basin was quiet now, washed clean by truth and morning light. Mika sat beside the fire pit as Jude lowered himself next to her. The sky glowed soft pink above the ridge where her village once stood. Jude watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You saved this place," he said gently. "You saved me first," she replied. Their eyes met in the fire's glow, two souls carved by different fires, suddenly warming in the same light. And for the first time since the night her world burned, Mika allowed herself to believe in something dangerous, something fragile. She allowed herself to believe in him. Winter found its way into Tularosa Basin slowly, as if unsure whether a land shaped by fire and dust could ever welcome cold. The first snow came light as breath, drifting over the rebuilt barn, settling on the fence rails Jude and Mika had repaired together. Smoke curled gently from the cabin chimney, a soft reminder that life, fragile but persistent, had taken root again. It had been months since Austin Silver's arrest. Months since Gus's confession lit the fuse on justice and burned Silver's empire from the inside. In that time, Jude helped Mika search the basin for signs of her scattered people. The land eventually answered. Tracks appeared near the foothills, remnants of shelters, and faint trails that only Mika could read. When she finally found her tribe surviving in a hidden ravine north of the basin, she didn't weep. She simply closed her eyes and let out the breath she had been holding since the night the flames took her home. Jude stayed with her through the weeks that followed, hauling timber, shaping new dwellings, helping the children gather food, listening to the elders speak of loss and resilience. Mika watched him work, wordless but deeply affected. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He simply gave what he could until the village no longer looked like a graveyard, but a place with a future. A year passed. The tribe grew stronger. Children played again. Smoke rose from cooking fires instead of ruins. And Mika, once a woman built entirely out of silence and survival, now carried something softer beneath her armor. She had not forgotten the night Jude stepped into the path of a bottle meant to break her, nor the night he fought flames at her side, nor the morning he stood beside her as she faced the man who had broken her world. She remembered everything. When Jude finally prepared to return to his ranch, he expected Mika to remain. He said nothing of it, but the resignation was in his voice, his posture, the quiet way he tightened his saddle straps. She approached him at sunrise, cloak pulled tight against the cold. "You leave today," she said. Jude nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Your people need you more than I do." Mika stepped closer. "Do you know what I learned this past year?" He turned to her slowly. "What? That some homes burn," she said, "but others are built." Her meaning settled into him with the weight of a heartbeat. He opened his mouth to speak, but she placed a hand over his. "I will go with you," she said simply. "If you will have me." Jude didn't answer with words. He pulled her into his arms, an instinct, a promise, a homecoming neither of them had dared imagine. For a long moment, they stood together, breath mixing in the cold air, the future unfolding quietly between them. When they rode away from the ravine, the tribe watched in silence, not with sadness, but with understanding. Mika looked back only once, then forward, toward Jude's ranch, waiting under winter's first light. And together, they rode toward a life not forged by fire, but by choice,